to Vital MTB's 2023 Enduro Test Sessions. We're back with 6 long travel 29ers, 2 high pivot, 2 mixed wheel, and 2 with world titles to their names. We're here at Snow Summit Bike Park in Big Bear Lake, California, where we rode a mix of steep, rocky terrain as well as built, manicured jump trails. I'm joined by Charlie Sponsel and Lear Miller for their ride impressions, where we'll run through which bikes we liked, who we think each bike is for, and which bike we would take home if we had to choose one. We set up all 6 bikes with Maxxis control tires in their downhill casing, as well as Tannis inserts inside front and rear wheels for the most realistic setup for an enduro race bike. Feedback Sports provided tools for all our setup and adjustment needs. Visit Big Bear and Snow Summit provided us with accommodations that were awesome right at the base of the mountain and made for easy testing and easy access to the bike park. We got all 6 bikes here safely with our 1UP USA rack. So let's jump into what we thought of all the bikes. Who wants to go first? Picking out of the hat. Rock, paper, scissors, or what?
3, 2, 1, shoot.
Okay, there you go.
All right, I get to go first. There you go. 10 burpees.
1, 6.
All right.
I'll take it.
Better luck next time.
Okay, here we go. Which one is it going to be? Dealer says 180 longest bike.
So, got 180 the limo.
Johnny,
Cut
what
to the
is
footage.
Get it, get it.
Oh.
Well done.
Maybe we'll get a bike here.
Feeling like a bike?
Nukeproof. I'm actually stoked to ride this. I heard Sam Hill rode one, so if I look half as cool as him, I'll be stoked. No, actually, this bike looks sweet. The bar height is nice and tall. It just looks like safe, normal. I'm not going to be surprised, hopefully. Bad
Here we
juju,
go.
bitch.
Deviate. Long?
It's
Yeah.
a long one.
Okay, Deviate long. Let's check it out. First impressions. I am super curious to ride this bike because I've never ridden a high pivot bike before, and this is a very high pivot. It's like really, really high up there. So curious how that feels. Rear axle moving around.
Little mixture. What do I got? Enduro Bro.
Oh.
Okay.
Specialized
Specialized
Enduro.
All right.
I'm super excited to ride this because I've never ridden an Enduro before. And I hear that's what, these are made for Enduro, which is what we're testing. So
Originator.
I'm pretty, yeah, this will be the originator.
What's it gonna be? What's it gonna be? Choose a bike blindfolded. Okay.
Yeah.
You're on the rocks.
He's trying to pick handlebars.
There we go. That's it. That's the track. That's the new track. It's got the weird handlebars.
Alright, so we'll do the initial impressions. Maybe just describe how it feels to you.
Yeah, so it feels like it definitely has grips, for sure. I'm excited for the track because it is the newest, hottest bike here. It's also high pivot, which I haven't ridden. It's got the new hotness down here with the Vivid, I believe. You know, a lot of people have been talking about how like busy it looks back here, but I can't see anything. So that's not bugging me too much right now.
Alright, it's down to the final 2 bikes, so for all the marbles or all the challenges at once.
Wait,
So,
if you get the Canyon, do you have to do the 180 regardless?
you got it regardless.
There's up.
20 blindfolded circles followed by a wheelie. 20 blindfolded ones. Ready?
Oh.
Oh my god.
Okay. Will we get an actual bike? Here we go. Intense. There we go. Complete. Intense is pretty big on flames in their paint jobs. What do I think of this Intense? I'm pretty excited. This is also their new hotness. I've never ridden a mullet bike before, so I'm really curious. Yeah, and I ride a VPP bike. I have a Mega Tower, so it's like...
Should be right at home.
Yeah.
Well, there's room for another couple challenges, you know?
20 bike presses.
1, 2,
You know, I think the shapeshifter
4.
is really affecting my left push right now.
Let's try it.
Yeah, okay.
Oh yeah,
All right,
okay, yeah.
It's all good now.
Whoa! It's so much lighter. The Canyon shapeshifter. In all seriousness, I don't think I've ever ridden a bike that has like a geo adjust, let alone this many levers and buttons. Is there a course you need to take, like a aeronautical course for these? Well, it looks cool. I'm excited. It's got XT, most reliable stuff in the game. They're all long, but like if I can get my hands up here, like those tall bars, it'll 180.
First try. That is pretty intimidating.
It's a bit of a different format this year. You'll notice we're all quite tall, all between 6'2" and 6'4". So for this test, we'll be on size XL bikes rather than the standard medium-sized test pool. You might recognize Charlie from his Team Robot days where he meticulously broke down trends and nuances within the mountain bike industry. He continues his meticulous approach to bikes to this day and can be found discussing the latest trends and topics in the Vital forums. You might recognize Lear's name from his photo work, which has become prominent within the bike industry, among other sports. When he's not behind the camera, he's usually in front of it, throwing style off anything in sight or pulling some insane alternate line out on trail. I'm Johnny Simonetti. I raced downhill bikes a long time ago and still love riding them, but find myself pedaling to the top more often than anything these days, and representing the 6'+ community when reviewing bikes. Enduro bikes are designed to do a bit of everything well, with the primary focus being descending performance. The speed of tracks has increased exponentially over the last couple of years. These bikes should ideally be able to descend with as little compromise as possible, while being easy enough to pedal all day. That being said, Enduro racetracks aren't always downhill, so these should also be able to navigate tight, awkward sections, generate speed well, and be able to put down the power across flat sections just as well as they descend. Snow Summit provided the perfect variety of terrain to test on, and a great way to compare the bikes. The host of numerous World Cup races in the late 90s and most recently the 3rd annual Gravity Festival, Snow Summit offers everything from super fun blue trails like Blue Steel to 10-ply, the 2019 US Open downhill track, and various jump trails like Party Wave, sure to log you some frequent flyer miles and everything in between. First up, the Nukeproof Mega 290 Carbon Elite. The Mega platform is speed-focused and has been developed over the last 10 years to win enduro races, carrying Sam Hill to 3 consecutive Enduro World Series titles in 2017, 18, and 19. The Mega sports 170 millimeters of travel, front and rear, is offered in full 29 or a mixed wheeled option with no geometry adjustment or flip chips in sight. Nukeproof is confident you'll love it just the way it is. Vital tested the Mega 290 against the smaller wheel Giga back in 2021 and gave Nukeproof high praise for the well thought out build spec, which is carried over into the 2023 model with the Elite level build kit. The Elite spec of the Nukeproof Mega uses a Fox 38 Performance Elite Series fork and Fox Float X2 Performance shock. Stopping power is handled by the new SRAM Deviate Mineral L brakes with 200mm rotors front and rear. A SRAM GX-Access T-Type drivetrain makes for crisp shifting paired with Nukeproof's own wheels, cockpit, and dropper post. Developed over the last 10 years to be the ultimate downhiller's trail bike, the Mega has earned 3 EWS titles under none other than Sam Hill. This was the smallest bike in our test with a comfortable 495mm reach paired to a 64-degree head tube angle and a 440mm chainstay length across all sizes for a well-balanced feeling out of its 1275mm wheelbase and a 78-degree seat tube angle for a nice upright pedaling position. Nukeproof Mega 290. It's the first bike I rode this morning. I kind of anticipated this being my favorite bike and kind of struggled to get it set up at first. With some tweaking here and there, kind of dropping the pressure and running a little more sag, it became really good. I think like pumping and jumping stuff was super easy, and then lowering that shock pressure helped with like the square edge stuff. I thought it did great in that. I just thought it was hard to control. The Performance Elite air shock does have high and low speed. This one is just a performance level, so it's similar to the coil shocks we rode, low speed only, which resulted in really fast rebound. We had the low speed, I think all of us had it closed, pretty much.
I was
or
like 3
nearly
from closed, yeah.
Yeah,
I was 1 click from closed.
What pressure did you run, Charlie?
210.
210.
230.
And I was like 250. So
Yeah.
roughly 20 to 30 pounds over body weight, which on an XL bike, you're going to expect to be in that upper range, which is where the performance shock kind of dropped the ball. I feel like there's no reason to be closing rebound entirely. In my mind, it should be closed at 300, not at 250.
Right.
And not 1 from closed at 200 or 220.
I just had a lot of like seesawing on the bike, and so I kept to try and mitigate that, more air pressure, but then that would make it like really harsh off the top. So what I ended up doing was running a little bit less air pressure up front and just locking out. It felt like back in the day before volume reducers when you just couldn't get your shock where you wanted it. So
locking the front, like maxing compression?
Compression, yeah.
High
like
speed?
High speed and low speed were both almost closed, which I never do. Out of all the bikes, this one fit them best. So once I did figure out all that suspension stuff, it was like, okay, cool, I could ride this bike. Because basically I just had the fork set up like ram into a wall, and then I could just like get
Ram
after
into
it.
a wall.
Yeah, exactly. And the rear end kind of did whatever it did. So the body position felt great. It was just like, I think probably the rear end could maybe use a different shock tune too, like because we all had the rebound almost closed. For me to have my rebound wide open on the fork and completely closed on the shock, like that's just a weird thing to have, and they weren't agreeing as much as some of the other bikes. Some of the other bikes, like the front and rear, really felt matched.
I think I might have a little bit more of a rearward position riding style than some of you guys as well.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, like, this felt great to me because I run a Fox 38. I kind of know where to set it on my bike at home. Got on this, and yeah, and you know, maybe that has something to do with Sam Hill, flat pedals, you know, just being a little bit back further on the bike. And maybe this bike wants to ride steeper terrain. I mentioned I really loved these brakes, but I rode them in the dry.
They have a really good like bite point feeling, but unfortunately riding in the rain, organic pads, I mean,
we could smell
every
them.
run I came down, they were hooked.
We could smell them.
Which was the only bike or brake on test that did that. But universally, loved the brake feel. Like, especially a parking lot test, they were super snappy. And then just not a lot of power.
Another kind of components thing, like, it's not much, but all these bikes lacking a bit of rise, this stem does have a little bit of an angle up, which I kind of appreciated.
And the stock bar is decently high. I think it was 30 or 35.
Yeah, so we only went up 4 mils. I think we should mention these pivot bolts both arrived loose and then continued to come loose. It does say 19 newton meters of torque, so it could be that when I took it out of the box, or like when I set it up first, because I was the first one to ride it, I noticed those were loose. I tightened them up, but I might have not put the full 19 newton meters to it, so maybe that could be why it came loose for you guys potentially.
Unfortunately, we were at the chairlift already, so we didn't have a torque wrench on hand. We just got it as tight as we could, pretty much with a multi-tool, which probably wasn't tight enough, but out of the box loose is a bummer. What is sweet out of the box is the ride wrap protection kit.
It's like $150 value.
Yeah, and I think it shows that they're, giving you as much value as possible, especially for the application of the bike. If you were going to go like enduro race or bike park or even just ride every day, it's pretty nice to protect your investment. And this isn't the most expensive bike in the test, but it's good to know that even at something other than their top level, you get that included. I thought it fit really well, and it was really, easy to ride on a variety of terrain.
Super playful bike in my opinion. I had a lot of fun on it. Yeah.
This is definitely one of the 2 bikes I wish I had more time on. Like, I think it took a lot longer to figure it out, but I think with a volume reducer, the fork would feel a lot better, and then potentially I wouldn't even care what the rear shock is doing if the fork felt good enough, or, maybe a different shock on there.
The Mega 290 did a great job of pairing a stable feeling on trail with the ability to remain playful and generate speed with ease. So who does this bike best suit?
To me, it feels like it's like just a really fun, like longer travel trail bike.
Yeah.
Like for me, I spend probably half the time riding jump lines and the other half doing 5,000 foot days, and being in Bellingham, like riding freeride features through that 5,000 foot day. And so I think this is a bike that would be a ton of fun to like go hit some drops on,
Spend a day on.
go hit some jumps on, but still feel like it, hauls. So it's really kind of this do it all. I wouldn't say it's maybe at this size for us, like the race bike per se, but
you could potentially get there with a double XL.
yeah.
And I think I'm kind of on the same page. This is a good size, I think, for a bike you want to ride every day and do a bit of everything pretty well. It's a really good option for everything from, trail riding, jumping, enduro racing, bike park laps, like.
And when the going gets like tight, when the track gets tighter, this bike felt so maneuverable for me. Like I could just pop it up, place it where I wanted it, ride out really stable, not feel like I was getting kicked around so much like maybe the Intense, which is a similar sized bike. I really liked it. I would say this was probably one of my top 3 bikes of the test for sure.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you guys said. I think it's got the most all-around package of, body position, geometry, suspension curve.
And I think the price point is really good too on it. I'm not sure what it is, but
It's not the most expensive, it's not the cheapest. So it's kind of right in the middle with everything, which, I think makes a bike like this great.
Hailing from Scotland and named after the incredibly long sword from medieval times, Deviate honors that legacy with a bike that is even longer. Receiving high praise since its launch, we were eager to finally see what the long, low, and slack high pivot bike was all about. The Claymore is built around 165 millimeters of rear wheel travel paired to a 170 millimeter fork, and is offered in a full 29 configuration only, with no flip chips or geometry adjustments to be found. Deviate offers the Claymore with a fully customizable build spec through the bike builder option on their website, or as a frame-only option. This was the most expensive bike in the test, coming in at around $9,675, but that money is put to good use. Our test bike came well spec'd with an Öhlins RXF 38 M2 fork and TTX2 air shock, Shimano XT 4-piston brakes with 200mm rotors front and rear to slow things down, XT 12-speed drivetrain, and Industry 9 Enduro S aluminum wheels to bring everything together. Other nice touches included a 1-up carbon bar and 42mm stem combo, as well as a 240mm 1-up dropper that allowed us all to run the seat nearly slammed and out of the way for descents. Hats off to Deviate for offering such an appropriate spec and allowing customers to put their money where it matters most. The high pivot design utilizes an 18-tooth idler pulley said to keep pedal bob under control and virtually eliminate pedal kickback. The Claymore has a roomy 520mm reach paired to a 64.3-degree head tube angle for a planted front wheel. The rear half of its 1303mm wheelbase is comprised of a 441mm chainstay length with around 21mm of rearward axle movement that is hardly noticeable on trail for such a significant number. Geometry numbers are rounded out by a 78-degree seat tube angle that creates an upright pedaling position with great front and rear wheel traction while climbing.
Yeah, the Deviate Claymore seemed to do a really good job of deleting things like small lips. Small lips I basically did not feel, and like landing into rocks you don't feel a lot of that. It just handles high speed compression super well. Super nice build spec. Like, I think this is a really expensive bike, and Öhlins suspension, is the majority of that, and it works really well.
I thought the suspension felt really good, and I kept waiting for the rear end to feel weird because it's such a high pivot, and maybe I could feel it, right? It was not a major distraction at any point. I didn't hit huge jumps on it, like we did a last lap down the big jumps, and I was on a different bike, so maybe that would feel weird, but I was just really impressed at how well it carried speed.
Yeah, and that was what worked well in the big jumps. It was like when you needed to kind of like generate speed. First run, I thought the rear felt super active, super planted, but you don't really pay for it on the back end when you need to like get up and generate speed. This is a really good combination of like deleting bumps and still generating speed.
Yeah, I think the holy grail with suspension is that you want a spring that absorbs chatter and like absorbs small bumps and like stays active, but you want damping that like gives you a wall to push against so you can hop. And I thought it did a great job. Like, I was just able to hop anywhere, and like the bike felt really light underfoot, but then it was carrying speed over every sort of bump really well. So I thought it did both very well. I don't know if that's the Öhlins stuff, or if that's the rear end of the Deviate, or all of the above.
I feel like it's probably down to something they figured out with the bike, but Yeah, be interesting to try like a coil shock on it or just a different brand shock and see if it behaves the same way. We're either stoked on Olin suspension or we're stoked on the Deviate Claymore.
I would 1,000% set it down if I were going to buy that bike.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I don't know what the large is compared to the extra large, but that's a very long bike. The whole deal is right, like this is what the manufacturers recommended for us.
Exactly.
Like, now
we're like dead in the middle of the size chart.
And I just respectfully disagree. I'm like, yeah, I'll take the one size down, please.
And that's where I was kind of surprised for how big it was. It was still fun.
Yeah, and I still had good front wheel grip, which is what I was super worried about, that I was going to just like eat it.
I just got off this bike and it's fast. It feels really cool. It took me a minute to get used to the length of it. I still think these longer bikes are a little tricky for my riding style. Like having to remember to stay over the front to keep the fork working. Because they are so long, it's easy to just get off the back and just rattle your hands. The rear shock felt super good. I did almost nothing to it. I think I left it wide open, set my pressure, adjusted my rebound, and it just felt money. This rear end worked so good. Immediately, I was just like plowing through all the little chatter, and like my feet just felt glued to the pedals and super stable.
Did it feel like the axle was moving that way, or did it just feel generally good?
It just felt generally good. It didn't feel that rearward to me. I mean, I did get off the Trek right before that, but it didn't feel like, oh, this rear end is just like dropping super behind me. There was some noise coming from it. I wasn't quite sure what it was. I know you guys were talking about maybe the brake pads. I kind of want to look here at the chainstay. Yeah, see, we're getting some like chain marks here on the chainstay, and there's like no chain protection there.
Oh, up here as well.
Yeah, right on the top there.
So that would be it, yeah.
So maybe
a little bit on the inside.
Yeah, so maybe
rubber, but yeah.
Maybe some of that noise was just chain clacking. Was kind of playing with the front for a little bit, and I think it was really it's a couple things. Like my tire was flat when I got to the top of the chairlift, so we aired it up, and I wasn't able to like check the proper pressure, so I might have been a little high front tire pressure, combined with like maybe not leaning far enough forward. The front end was and the carbon bars, like the front end was a little bit more chattery than I was hoping for, but it didn't feel like it affected it too much. And every time really that my hands were like starting to get chattery, I was just like, just get forward and just like ride more aggressive, and then it just kind of went away. For being one of the bigger bikes in the test, it never felt tall. And some of the other bikes felt kind of tall for being XLs. And just tall like with your knees and when you're leaning it in the air or you're trying to like recover on an off camber or something like that. It jumps great. It's super long, so it's not the most playful thing in the air or even on the ground. Actually, after riding 10 ply on the Slash, getting on this, I was struggling a bit to like keep the same lines that I was riding on the Slash, but then it almost didn't matter because big wheel, long wheelbase, it was just like, oh, I messed that up, just keep looking straight, and it just didn't lose speed. So like if you mess up your line, you're not like crushing all your speed like maybe you were on some of the other bikes. And so for that, I think it's like a sick race bike because you're gonna make mistakes, especially on an enduro track where you've maybe only pre-ridden the course once and you're sort of riding it blind. Like the reality is you're never gonna have like a perfect run. And so like a bike that can recover really well or that you can even just ride tired, I think is key.
The Claymore surprised us with how lively it felt on trail for being such a high pivot bike with such a significant level of rearward axle movement. It holds speed incredibly well and demands being ridden at a high speed for how much traction is on tap. We all felt a size smaller might be our cup of tea for an even more playful ride, but who is the square edge slayer for?
Someone who wants to race enduro for sure. It's kind of, does both things really well. You could take it to a bike park and have fun, and you could take it to a race and feel like it's stable enough to go fast confidently.
I think the bike that they sent us is perfect for me. Well, it's longer than I want. So it would be for if I were smashing bike park laps.
Yeah.
Where it's like lots of holes, lots of pumping, jumping, like lots of different situations, and like pretty good traction. But I think if I were riding weird, sketchy stuff that was slippery, it's like a lot of bike to get around some of the really tight stuff we did.
I think if you maybe are like a privateer and you're serious about racing and you're spending a lot of money to travel somewhere, this bike might be the one that goes fast.
Serious about the long-term durability, because if you think of it as like not a new bike every year but something you could ride for a few years, then it kind of offsets the cost a bit.
Totally.
Versus getting a new bike every year.
We do have a lot of pivots going on under here. Like I would say there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sets of bearings. This bike did have the most grease on it, but it's got a lot of dirt in those linkages, and I would imagine if you don't address that and you just kept riding it, you'd wear out those bearings pretty quickly. I don't know.
I don't know though. It's developed in Scotland, I think, so maybe they know something we don't about keeping all that together. But yeah, certainly a question mark in my head, like what's the durability or what's the service life of that look like and how easy is it to do?
So all around, super impressive bike.
Yeah,
Really impressive. I mean, I guess you get what you pay for in that sense.
for sure. Yeah, and if you want an enduro race bike, I think we all agree it's probably the best option for the application.
Our next bike is the Trek/99XO Access T-Type, and it looks like a session. Well, kind of. Being released the day we arrived to our test session, the Slash was certainly a head turner in the lift line. It's all new for 2023 and littered with Trek's latest tech. Now rolling on mixed wheels in its stock configuration with a handful of alternative configurations possible. Centered around a high pivot suspension design with 170 millimeters of rear wheel travel, the new bike comes equipped with an upper idler, new lower ISCG mounted idler, leverage ratio flip chip in the lower shock mount, interchangeable lower shock mounts for running full 29 or mixed wheel setups, downtube storage, a one-piece barn stem, along with a handy integrated tool inside of the steer tube to top everything off. The 6th generation Slash sees many changes from its predecessor, most notably a high pivot suspension design that increases rear wheel travel up to 170mm with a 170mm fork. We tested the 99XO Access T-Type build, which retails for $9,499, including a RockShox Zeb Ultimate fork, new Vivid Ultimate rear shock, SRAM XO Access T-Type drivetrain, and a 170mm RockShox Reverb Access dropper post. Trek's own Race Shop Limited one-piece bar stem combo was certainly a love-hate component, but the Bontrager Line 30 carbon wheels are a welcome touch and the lightest wheels set in the test. Trek chose to use a 19-tooth idler pulley to create a higher anti-squat value that would eliminate pedal bob from the rear suspension while remaining highly active over small bumps. The frame also features Trek's active braking pivot to keep rear suspension active under braking. The Slash landed in the middle of the road in terms of sizing with a 513mm reach and slack 63.3 degree head tube angle. 1311mm wheelbase with size-specific 439.2mm chainstay length made it the second longest bike in the test. While it was not the quickest climber, the 76.7 degree C-tube angle made for an efficient pedaling position when pointed uphill. This bike has just about every advance in mountain bike technology from the last 5 years rolled into one. With the exception of the headset cable routing everyone loves and ditching the knock block, are all these advances worth the wait, or is it all hype?
It's got a lot going on in the back, right? So you've got high pivot idler, you've got low idler, it's got the new transmission stuff. Yeah,
We got interchangeable lower shock mounts, we got adjustable head tube angles, we got ABP,
got a front and rear fender.
storage, integrated tool in the steer tube. Missing because he rattles a lot.
For the first half of the day, Johnny's just like,
yeah,
what's that noise? What's that noise?
I think this chain slot protector is pretty cool too, how it's kind of cupped. It's a really cool design that kind of eliminates that side-to-side movement too that would normally scuff up this or just create more noise.
Right?
Yeah.
You can see it's working. The derailleur isn't moving at all.
Yeah,
which is pretty cool.
Kind of pivoting around that lower puller.
Which is that's specifically what that's for, is MRP designed it for high pivot bikes, so the derailleur isn't.
This might have been my favorite bike of the test. Or at least, if I were racing, I think this potentially would be the bike I would go the fastest on. It was immediately confidence inspiring for me. I feel like the rear suspension design worked really well, especially with the smaller wheel. I feel like I'm a tall enough guy, we all probably are, where a mullet setup is not necessary, unless you're riding a really tight track. But this, for being a mullet, didn't feel like the smaller wheel was hanging up at all. The rear end felt super planted. I think it's worth noting, again, sound like a broken record, bringing the bar height up. This guy is not quite what we're looking for.
And especially on such a long reach bike, like if your bars are low, it feels like you're in plank position the whole time.
So swapping that out right away, big deal. I think also, while we're on the components, I had to ride this seat slammed to feel really comfortable on it.
Same.
So I could not run this dropper. I love the look of the wireless kit, but for functionality purposes, I don't think that a 170 dropper is long enough for an XL bike. I also really like this fender. Not a lot of dirt in here. This doesn't seem like, for all the pivots that this bike has, this seems like it would be a really low maintenance bike. Another thing, 32 chainring.
Why?
I would love to see like even a 34 on the front of this for me. When you have this Axis rear derailleur and you have a 27.5 rear wheel, I could ride this with a 24, or sorry, with a 34, no problem, and climb steep fire roads.
They didn't do headset routing, which is really nice. It is an adjustable head tube angle, which is really nice.
Yeah.
You've got replaceable lower shock mount to go 29 or mixed wheel.
With different progression rates. The two shock positions are sort of roughly, like Trek would say, designed for less progressive for an air shock, which is inherently more progressive, and then more progressive for a coil shock, which is inherently more linear.
2 drop chains on a single run.
Yep, off, what was it, the bottom idler and the upper.
The upper,
idler.
yeah.
Two different instances.
2 different instances, same run, dropping the chain.
Well, just let me clarify for a second that dropping a chain twice is not sweet.
And really not acceptable for a bike that costs what this bike costs. That being said, I will say that this bike pedaled really well through the rough. Just really active suspension, under pedaling and braking, I think was like the really big thing for me that I noticed, that it was just like, wow, I don't feel my back end like skidding or chopping much at all.
Uninterrupted.
And especially coming off the Intense, which was our other mullet bike, I was expecting the mullet to feel a little more bouncing around than the 29er bikes, and that was totally not the case with this bike. It just felt super planted and fast. Maybe it's not the most agile pedaling bike if you're climbing single track. If you're a fire road climber, it's a sick bike. If you're going to be climbing technical single track, it's just not quite as lively as you want that rear end to feel. Sometimes you just like want to just unweight to just get that wheel up a tiny ledge. This feels like, oh, I might still keep that back wheel on the ground when I go to unweight up that ledge.
I think it's a bit of an illusion where that kind of chain tension creates a really rigid pedaling platform.
Right.
But if you were to like pedal kick and get up something,
yes,
it would just squat and kind of sit through what you're, the way it feels while pedaling is very different off the pedals.
The only other thing I'd say is I felt a little bit of front tire push, and I think that was probably mostly due to the super short stem. We had a 35 on there because we were trying to recreate the bond tracker setup to be as close to the manufacturer's recommended. And I think if this were my personal bike, I would move to a 40 or a 42 or a 50 just to get like a little bit more weight on the front tire.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that was part of why I just couldn't figure out why on the first day it felt weird. But I think it was partially due to super short stem and a lower stack. I wasn't very familiar with that type of feeling. So.
And I think if you were on a steeper trail, you might not feel that push as much.
Because you just have all of your weight on your front tire all of the time.
Yeah. And so I think this bike was really designed for the steep rough stuff.
With rather impressive rear suspension performance and confidence-inspiring geometry, who is the Slash 4?
Getting sick out there.
Just getting sick and twisted. I think it's a highly adaptable bike that is good for, wide variety of terrain as long as it's generally aggressive. Felt like it was kind of a little hard to generate speed, like pumping through stuff. But if you're generating speed pedaling, there's like zero drawback. Like it just seems to get up and go. Something really steep is where this bike would shine. With it being the mixed wheel setup and the high pivot, you kind of want to be rearward all the time, kind of swing off the back. And this bike would be insanely fun on like a steep rut track.
I think if I lived in Squamish, this is the bike I would get. If I was just smashing steep stuff all the time and needed to be able to like turn in tight spaces and all that stuff, I think it would be great. I want more time on the Vivid to figure out the spring rate or reducers or damping or something, because it just always was harsh a little bit. And that was I was really excited to try it and I wanted to like it, and I never got it where I wanted. So I think that's probably a fixable problem, but it wasn't just easily solved by turning knobs or playing with pressure. I think this would be a good Squamish cross-country bike.
Yeah,
Like, this is the bike
exactly,
for
like,
everything.
One bike to do everything is in everything in Squamish and the Sea to Sky corridor.
Yeah.
I think this is for you if you like riding some of the gnarliest trails and you pedal to the top of them. It's kind of a bit dead on maybe the more light duty trails that you have to carry more speed on. It didn't feel quite as responsive. Maybe, you know, with how versatile this is, you get on a more wide open track, maybe you throw the 29er in the back, swap the settings, and it's a pretty versatile bike. I really liked it. The moment that I got into the steeps and the rough, it just felt like I could just let go of the brakes, look ahead, and just ride it out, which I really liked.
This is what that stem looks like to me, just like, just that.
The Enduro lineup dates back to 1999 and has stood the test of time as one of the most widely capable mountain bikes on the market. This current generation Enduro has been in production for over 4 years, making it the oldest bike in our test. It's also more downhill focused than ever, being built around 170 millimeters of horse-link driven FSR rear suspension and a 170 millimeter travel fork with 29-inch wheels front and rear. We tested the expert level build kit, which retails for $7,000 and comes spec'd with all aluminum specialized components, RockShox Zeb Select Plus fork, and a Super Deluxe Select Plus shock with hydraulic bottom mount adjustment. Stopping power is handled by SRAM Code RS brakes with 200mm rotors front and rear, paired with SRAM GX Access Eagle drivetrain and a 1-up 210mm dropper to round things out, as well as a steer tube mounted SWAT tool for easy access on trail. Geometry adjustment built into the frame is found in the form of a rear shock eyelet flip chip that allows for just under half a degree of head tube angle adjustment and 7mm of bottom bracket height adjustment. The frame also allows plenty of room for a water bottle and swap box for down tube storage. We tested our size S5 Enduro in the low setting, which comes out to a 511mm reach and 63.9 degree head tube angle. The 1302mm wheelbase includes a 442mm chainstay length for a mostly planted feeling that required a bit more effort to throw around. A 76 degree seat tube angle, which was the slackest in test by only a small margin, makes for a relaxed pedaling position and is not the strongest quality of the Enduro. Being older than the outgoing Trek Slash and bringing long travel 29er performance to where it is today over the last 4 years, it's safe to say the Enduro has remained ahead of its time. With such impressive downhill performance, is the Enduro still the best all-rounder out of the group?
This bike has been around for a while, and I've actually always been really curious to ride one. I think I would personally size down. The S5, in my opinion, is for someone over 6'5". It's a long bike. Or someone who's just maybe not as playful as me. Like if you are someone who's really planted, likes to keep the wheels on the ground, it's tons of traction, rides really smooth, but I don't think it's very playful. It just wants to sit there and go straight and go fast. I think it's probably a great race bike on wide open tracks. I don't think it's great on really tight things, and I think if you make mistakes, you are a bit of sold out of luck because it's just gonna continue to go the way that you had it pointed.
I really got along with it. It's a tale of two bike rides because I was oversprung at first, and so it was very similar to the Intense experience, but swapped out springs, sat into the travel more, and I was either, like I went from the high BB setting with a stiff shock,
Low BB,
I went from low BB with a stiff shock to high BB with a soft shock, and all of a sudden, like, my pedals were where I wanted it to be, tracking really good through rocks, carrying speed through rough shit. Like, it was great, and I think the number one complaint that I hear about this bike, especially on the internet, is that the seat tube is too slack, because, like, the effective is, like, really far back there, and I thought it was great, because, like, the vertical ones, like the Deviate,
they're kind of in the way.
Yeah, like, it's fine if you're just pedaling straight up a fire road, but
Right.
if you're doing any sort of normal mountain biking, it's, you're like this, which is super weird.
Yeah, which to give them and Deviate credit, this has a 210 dropper. They have a 240 dropper on there, and it kind of helps get it out of the way.
Yeah.
The thing I got on it was expecting to feel like pretty stretched out and not that stoked on it, but it was super easy to get used to. I felt like I kind of put the rear wheel wherever I wanted. I did notice that the rear end was a little longer than some of the other bikes, and that became apparent kind of in like tighter turns, which kind of like Lear kind of mentioned. But I thought the rear suspension felt great. I was on the opposite end of the spectrum. I was thinking that the spring was going to be too soft, and I measured the sag this morning at like 30%. So I was like, it's a little further than I want to be, but it worked great for the whooped out bike park. And I thought, like high speed compressions, it was really, really good. And even on the jump trails, carried speed really well. I over jumped a lot of stuff first lap, so not the worst thing for a bike that you want to go fast on. And I think it does that really well. I think we did a couple 10 ply laps at the end where I was on the canyon coming from this, and I was kind of wishing that I was on this just for the rear suspension performance. I think it is really, really good.
Yeah, I thought the front and rear suspension agreed with each other a lot. And it's kind of weird because it's like an Ultimate but without buttercups, and then it's the 2023 shock.
No,
but it's like the Select version.
I think it's current. I think it's
current here.
So this is Select Plus front and rear.
Select Plus has high speed and low speed?
Yep. Ultimate gives you the buttercups. That's the only difference.
Oh, that's sick.
Yeah. So I thought it was awesome spec. Like, we had a few things rattling around. Did have the crank arm rattle loose. That was a little concerning. And then the older access derailleurs make quite a bit more noise than the transmission ones.
Yeah.
And Shimano ones. So I think that was most of the issue. But yeah, the crank arm was a little concerning. Other than that, I thought it was awesome. We threw a taller bar on and a few more spacers under the stem than when Leo rode it, which thankfully he gave us some valuable feedback that the front felt a little low. So we just went ahead and threw on the tallest bars we could. And it felt great. I think my only complaint was not having all the adjustments on the rear shock that you could with like an Ultimate level shock.
Yeah. But if you had to choose between having a compression knob here or there, all day on the fork.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the fork was awesome. Super easy to set up. Everything else just worked. It was cool. I mean, this one-up dropper kind of rattles a bit, but I think that was most of the rattling we were hearing. The GX derailleur makes a bit of noise. You can't throw a transmission on here. It's not UDH compatible, but those are minor details.
If I were to buy this bike, I'd definitely size down. I would get an S4 instead of an S5. But for 90% of the riding we did today, the length was manageable. It was just in those really tight corners and any sort of flat corner without support that was loose, where the front to rear ratio was a little weird, and I wish I either had a longer chainstay or a shorter front end. But like you said, this is one of the longer chainstays on test, so it was pretty manageable even for being such a long bike for me.
With such a heavy focus on smashing descents and bumps of all sizes, what kind of rider pairs best with the Specialized Enduro?
If you're a tall guy, if you're sub 200 pounds, because that's what the OEM spring is set for, and there's no compression adjustment, so you're kind of locked into that. If you're a tall guy, sub 200 pounds, like to keep the wheels on the ground, go fast in a straight line, this might be the bike for you.
I think it's a great bike if you ride really fast stuff a lot. I don't think the lower speed trails it was as exciting. Like, it was playful enough. Maybe an air shock would help that. But if you want one bike, I think, to do kind of like a lot of aggressive riding on, then it kind of is a good substitute for a downhill bike, and it's playful enough to still have fun on like the blue trails.
I thought this was a really good one bike.
Yeah.
Like, with a slacker seat angle, I thought it pedaled really well. Yeah, I think it smashes stuff at high speeds. And if you get the right size, right? Like, if I'm on the S5, I wouldn't want to do all my riding on it. But if I size down a little bit, put a tall bar on it, I feel like this could be a one bike and I'd be pretty happy.
Yeah, and I think that's where it would be like, if you're looking at an S5, but your trails maybe aren't as high speed, go for the S4. If you're looking at mostly bike park, maybe some enduro racing, like generally just higher speed riding, then the longer size would be beneficial, because you do get that, like, in those kind of hang up moments or unexpected things, having the longer front end is nice. But for maneuverability, an S4, it'd be interesting to try. But I was happy to feel more comfortable than I thought I would straight away on it.
Intense has a long history of building race-winning bikes and is carrying on that legacy with the Intense factory race team and with the Tracer 279. With one win under its belt and a second place overall in the U21 EWS overall beneath Seth Sherlock, the Tracer 279 is a very promising platform from Intense and proven to be competitive on track. Stepping away from the VPP designs of the past, the newest Tracer uses Intense's own JS Link. The Tracer uses a mixed wheel setup with 165mm of rear wheel travel and a 170mm fork. Our test bike was spec'd with the Pro Level build kit, which retails for just under $6,000, featuring a Fox 38 Float Performance Elite Series fork and Fox DHX2 Performance Elite shock. Braking and shifting are handled by a Shimano XT 12-speed drivetrain and XT 4-piston brakes. E13 components are found throughout with LG1 aluminum wheels, Helix base cranks, race carbon bar, along with a travel adjustable dropper. ODI Intense branded grips are a nice touch to finish out the build. A geometry adjust flip chip is found in the lower link of the bike with high and low settings. Intense suggests the high setting for more technical terrain and the low for bike park style terrain. We kept it in the low setting for the duration of the test. Our size XL Tracer had a comfortable 500mm reach paired to a 64.5 degree head tube angle for a relatively neutral body position on the bike. The shorter 1287mm wheelbase with 439mm chainstay length made for snappy handling on trail. The 77.9 degree C-tube angle provided an upright pedaling position. With the Tracer finding success in world-class level enduro races and Intense stepping away from the VPP-driven bikes of the past to their own platform, how did the Tracer stack up?
So yeah, I just wrapped up riding the Intense Tracer 279 and straight away felt surprisingly really comfortable on it. After hearing Charlie and Lear's feedback, I didn't have the highest hopes, but super comfortable for me right off the bat. These like dirt jump bars really helped.
I really liked the geometry of this bike. Where the bottom rack was at, where the head angle was at, all the geometry. Like, you know, like all these bikes, once we put a proper rise bar on it.
For an XL?
For an XL person, yeah, it really felt like it had a good geo, and I felt really comfortable on the bike. But yeah, it just didn't absorb the bumps.
I went a little bit softer on the spring than what was recommended, and just never stopped changing it throughout the day. So it's really kind of hard to find the sweet spot. I was kind of just playing with spring rate. Rebound was fully closed and really fast. Compression was 2 or 3 clicks from open, and the reason for that was right off the top it felt really good, and then it just, as you described, hit a wall of compression where when you're having those higher speed impacts on trail, it just would skate everywhere. Crossing the ski run, hitting a bunch of little kind of skipper bumps, it was insane. It was super active, did a really good job of that, but then you go to something like 10 ply where those bumps, those holes become bigger, and you're hitting them at about, you know, a similar speed. It just, yeah, like I'd be holding a line and just falling off of it if you're trying to hold high line, or kind of bouncing wide in turns because the wheel would just kind of skate around.
I think the bike was kind of oversprung for almost, well, we swapped some springs out and stuff. I think I was running the 500-pound spring, which to me felt like a bike park spring, like it would, or like a bike park setting. Like it had, like you said, kind of that nice soft off the top, but then a lot of platform to push into jumps. And I think like I went probably the highest on the hip on this bike, just because I like was really, like really able to push into it and like pop off of it, which felt super fun.
Yeah.
And landing off of that jump felt great. Like it, I finally was able to break through that progressive wall, and then it felt like this kind of bottomless travel. Yeah, anytime that you're like set halfway through the travel in like some chatter, and then you were to hit like a square edge, it was all over. It wasn't quite enough to like break through that progressive wall, and then it would just buck the back wheel, and then having the 27.5 back wheel just kind of enhances that feeling.
I have nothing meaningful to say about the suspension on this bike. I have no clue how it rides because I didn't ever get the right spring rate. So I just felt a very stiff rear end the whole time. It was just like I said, I got really good at avoiding all the bumps.
It's a bummer because it feels like the fit and geo is great. I thought it was super comfortable.
Well, because it's the Performance Elite rear shock, is that right? It's relying on base valve shims for high-speed compression, low-speed compression, and so I wonder if a more open high-speed compression base tune would feel better. Like it would have more, it wouldn't hit that wall halfway through. And then Lear, everything that you described about being like bucked when you got deep into the travel on lips, I feel like that would benefit a lot. Like when you're in the really progressive zone with a lot of spring wound up, more high-speed rebound damping on the base tune could feel better. For people who are wondering what on earth we're talking about with shock tunes, there's knobs on all these shocks where I, as a customer, can adjust the setting of the damping valves, whether that's the rebound valve or the compression valve, but there's also non-adjustable damping that's built into the shock, and that's selected by the manufacturer. And Fox, for instance, has like 15 or 20 different bass tunes that are available for different sort of suspension platforms that matches the curve of the suspension. So basically what I'm hearing from my friends here about the Intense is the Intense might need to go back and redo their homework on this one. The Geo felt good. It felt like the bike was probably where I wanted it to be. The shifting felt nice. I really like the integrated fender.
Download storage is cool.
Yeah, like there were cool things about the bike, but unfortunately I wasn't able to get good.
Another thing with the Tracer was there was quite a bit of noise out of it, which couldn't really put my finger on, but it did have a fair amount of negative travel. When you pick the bike up from its static position, it would have quite a bit of movement out of the lower link. It'd be interesting to try, factory level shock, something with a lot more adjustment.
Maybe even an air shock that's more linear.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I didn't say it, but you can actually be more linear with an air shock than a coil shock depending on how it's set up. So yeah, potentially that could be really good.
I'd be curious if the high and low settings would change that leverage rate. It felt good in the low, so we kind of left it there.
It's funny though, because these are made here in California, or they're designed here in California. They're pretty much tested here. Mm-hmm. So you would think that, yeah, this would be kind of the type of terrain, but you know, I'd be curious to try it somewhere that's maybe like slower speed, bigger compressions, like steep northwest riding or something, and just see how, because you know, maybe it would have that nice small off the top for the roots, and then act real well in that slower speed compression, but it didn't seem to like the high speed to me.
And that's what was so confusing, because there was so much traction in the first part when you're kind of like picking your way through, and then you'd open it up and it would just rattle you offline.
With super supportive suspension and geometry that 2 out of 3 testers felt comfortable on, what kind of rider is the Tracer 2794?
This bike is for if you really just want to ride bike parks a lot. Jump trails, awesome. I think, I'm trying to think of like if you were to race enduro on it and it generates speed so well that would be an advantage. It changes direction well until you start hitting compressions, and then it's kind of up to you to make it hold a line. But like riding the steep stuff, wanting to point it in a direction was really easy at lower speeds, but then at higher speeds, really hard to hold on to.
This might be a Sea Otter downhill bike.
That would be a perfect application for it.
Right, totally. It potentially could be really good for a newer level rider maybe, where you're not having, you're not hitting as high of speeds, but it has all that progressiveness to like save you.
If you overshoot something, it's a very safe feeling.
Case a big jump, fall into a hole that you're not sure about. Yeah, like it could really save you from that. So, you know, maybe it's just a little bit more of like a newer racer platform, you know, or a newer rider.
Yeah, where you're progressing and you're going to be trying stuff that's kind of scary, or you're not going to plan for it to go one way or the other. If you're looking at this bike, consider maybe a higher end shock as an upgrade, or having someone help you really dial it in that has a telemetry set or something, so you could really understand what's going on.
Well, that was the Intense Tracer.
Good bike park bike.
Canyon's Drive.
Last but certainly not least, in fact, longest in test, is the Canyon Strive CFR Underdog. The Strive is the second bike in our test with an EWS title to its name under 2021 EWS overall champion Jack Moyer. The Strive has been in Canyon's lineup since 2010 and has undergone a number of facelifts since then. Its current iteration is larger than ever and was the biggest bike in our test in terms of wheelbase and reach numbers. Thankfully, the Strive has a few forms of adjustability built in the form of a 5mm reach adjustable headset cup and with Canyon's own Shapeshifter technology. Shapeshifter is a small air spring housed within the main rocker link, which can rotate the position of the upper shock eyelet with the flick of a switch. Pushing the click button on the bar rotates the eyelet to reduce rear wheel travel 20mm, as well as steepen the seat tube and head tube angles by 1.5 degrees to provide a more efficient platform. Hitting the clock button at the bar reverts the bike back to its long travel orientation after cycling the rear shock to rotate the eyelet back into place. CFR Underdog Level Strive retails for $4,800 and uses a Fox 38 Performance Elite fork, Fox Float X2 Performance Elite shock, and rolls on DT Swiss EX511 rims with 370 star ratchet hubs. Bar and stem are Canyon's in-house components, as is the 200mm travel adjustable dropper post. The Strive certainly wins the best bang for your buck category, with little to be desired in its stock configuration. The Strive is centered around 160mm of rear wheel travel that drops to 140mm with shapeshifter and a 170mm fork up front. Our size XL had very roomy 525, 530, or 535mm reach options depending on the headset cut position. We opted to test with a 525mm reach. The head tube angle sits at 63 degrees or 64.5 degrees with shapeshifter, and the 76.5 degree seat tube angle steepens up to 78 degrees with shapeshifter engaged for an upright pedaling position. The extensive 325mm wheelbase has a 435mm chainstay length, which was the shortest in test and helps create a fast-turning bike that is stable at speed. The Strive is a bike we were all interested to try because of its shapeshifter technology, mostly to see if it's something actually useful or if it's something we would probably never use.
The bike feels really comfy. I've had a couple moments where I've got into just like the deep chunder, and like on the third hit, it just bucks me. I think some of that has to do with the bike is really long in the front. I'm riding a little more over the front, and so when that back end gets light, it just wants to pick up a bit. Otherwise, like the thing tracks really nicely and it corners pretty sick for how long it is. Compared to some of the other longer bikes, I feel like this corner's slow to get started, and then once you initiate the turn, it just wants to rip around it.
Canyon was sweet. It was really easy to set up the suspension and felt pretty comfortable on it straight away. It's got a pretty decent stack height on it, so that was easy to get used to. I think putting it in the short headset setting was the right call. Nice upright position, easy to generate speed on. It's got like a really good rear suspension feeling. Really short rear end on this bike relative to the front. I think that's why it was so easy to change direction. Like I found if I was coming into like a highline, I could just easily just weight the rear and get the front to set up and hook turns really well.
It was a little long for me in the front, so it was like kind of this slow start to a corner, but then with the short rear end, it was like once you initiated that turn, bam, you were around it. And that was surprising for such a long bike that I felt like I could really kind of slap through them a little bit more than some of the other long bikes.
Yesterday, where it was a little more blown out and drier, it almost felt like when you were trying to pitch the bike and initiate turns, you were almost pulling against the front wheel rather than kind of laying it over. And I think that's from it being slack, long. It's really far out there. Felt really stable and really easy to kind of pump and jump stuff despite being so long.
I think the short rear end kind of helps with that, with like the pumping and like just being able to like kind of manual or like kind of slap the rear. Yeah, just kind of push down and like it's right there kind of under your feet, you know, and just kind of adds the speed that way.
One other thing that's worth saying, tallest stack height on test. So thank you so much, Canyon, for speccing a taller head tube on the extra large. Every other bike had like a 110 or a 120 head tube, and this one's a 140. So that
greatly appreciated.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense on an extra large bike. This was the bike of all of them that I really wanted to hate because it's the longest, because it's got the crazy shapeshifter thing going on, because it has a matte paint job, blah, blah, blah. But I was really surprised. It's not a perfect bicycle, but it rode really well, and the length wasn't as unmanageable as I was worried it would be. We had the headset cups in like the absolute shortest setting, so that helped, but that's not actually a ton of adjustment, I think. In
5 mil.
Is it 5 from the farthest or 10 from the
5 from the middle, so 10 overall.
Yeah, so it could be 10 millimeters longer. It's still really, really long. Yeah, the rear suspension was super interesting because, like, for instance, it was in long travel, by far the worst pedaling bike. Like, it was the only bike that I rode that, like, really bobbed, and you could look down and watch the rear shock doing this. But then if you shapeshift it into the short travel mode, it firms up really hard. And that actually was pretty cool on some of the flow trails that we rode, where it was pretty flat, it was hard to carry speed, you're pumping a lot. And so shapeshifting on those trails, like, I can imagine if I were enduro racing, there's so many like agonizingly horrible sections to ride.
It's not always downhill.
On a big plush long travel bike where you can't pump at all. It's just like a waterbed, and it was sweet to just be able, like, I was gaining on you guys in a lot of sections because I could pump, and that was pretty cool. It helped on smooth stuff, right? Like I wouldn't shapeshift on like a weird techie,
low
like
speed
rough
tech.
enduro thing. Yeah. I think this bike would benefit from a volume reducer. It was really easy to get bottom on it, so I think if I were racing this bike, I'd probably add 1 or 2 volume reducers to the rear shock, but it just rode really good, and it felt damped, like front and rear. It felt like it had a lot of control and stability. It wasn't like seesawing all over the place.
I would agree. I think a volume spacer would be good. I ran less sag than Charlie, and on some really hard impacts, it was a very hard bottom where it would almost spring out of it.
The spec is like phenomenal for the price. This is probably one of the most affordable bikes, if not the most affordable, question mark.
By far.
Under $5,000, and you get in like DT Swiss wheels, full XT drivetrain, performance elite suspension, which unlike the coil shock gets you all the high and low speed adjustments.
We have control tires on all these, but these are the tires that this bike comes with?
Yeah, and a double down casing rather than downhill.
The one bad thing I'll say is that the headset cups, the adjustable headset cups, they maybe have play or rock in them, like there's this knocking noise.
We seem to be kind of more down to the Acros headset, which uses like a plastic race, and I think it's really sensitive to torque, so we may have dropped the ball there, but also like headsets should not have plastic races, so.
Yeah, we've heard rumors that some people run like Chris King headsets, and some people run like glue in there to hold the cups in and everything.
I'd recommend if you're racing Enduro on this bike, having a mechanic or being mechanically apt, because we did have a few things come loose. Most notably the rear axle. Snugged it pretty well, and by the end of yesterday, it was pretty loose. So something to keep an eye on. We snugged it back up, and it lasted through the whole day of testing with no other issues.
I think I would size down if I were to get this bike. Like, it has the shortest chainstay on test, which funny enough, like it really did manual better than any other bike. Like there wasn't a single bike that manualed good until I got on this one. I was like, oh my goodness, I can actually like control manuals on this, which isn't surprising. It has the shortest chainstay. It had a little front tire push. I think we had Hero dirt this morning, and I think if it had been more blown out, I would have had even more front tire push. But it wasn't a problem. Like it was manageable. The front tire just had way more grip than I was expecting.
With an impressive level of stability, with Ecolay's impressive nimble feeling at lower speeds, who does this drive best suit?
This bike's for what, the value enduro racer?
We all seem to kind of think we like the Deviate a little more, maybe, but that's a whole different tax bracket. Yeah, so if you're a little more money conscious, this is a really good option. And I mean, and money aside, it I think is this a close second. If you're racing enduro and you are a high-level rider, it's a really good option. And I think the shapeshifter is a really good thing to have.
I would say the long bikes, the Canyon and the Deviate, performed sort of exactly the way I would expect, where on like straight rough sections or like hawking into a pile of rocks, they were sick. Like if you could just straight line through something, it was awesome. But as soon as you got into really off-camber slippery bits, that's where it was like you were chasing traction on the front tire because it was like really out there, or any sort of really tight thing, like you said, it's hard to kind of make it better.
Also, this bike could be for you if you are really tall. Because, like, huge point, because, like, some of these bikes, you know, the Intense, the Nukeproof, fit us really good at 6'4", but if you're 6'6", or if you're 6'7", or
you gotta
taller,
go double XL if they offer it. And that's why I think we were able to throw those bikes around more. That fits our riding style better, but we're not, like, flat-out racing where if that's you're going to need something a little bigger probably.
Totally, and that can also depend on your tracks, but yeah.
Yeah, and your riding style, so. Alright, so that's a wrap. We tested all 6 bikes. I think we rode pretty much every trail here, as well as a miserable steep climb that Charlie found for us to see how good or bad the bikes climb. So let's see, what'd you guys think of the bikes?
Yeah, all the bikes are really good. I think that's probably like the overarching theme is like compared to bikes 5 years ago, you know, like all those bikes would outperform most bikes, even the best bikes 5 years ago. So there's something to be said for that. We've come a long way, bike industry, and thank you for that.
While we did have control tires, a lot of the bikes came with those tires stock, just in a slightly lighter casing, which, you know, might be a little more ideal if you're using them for a bit more of everything, but we just wanted the most realistic setup, and as a result, I think just one broken part.
I think there's a lot to be said for yeah, the fact that we ran the same tires on all the bikes, because so many bike manufacturers will spec tires sort of are the last thing to be sort of decided on, and a lot of times they'll spec whatever's lightest or just most affordable at the time. And I think the bike can have, like, that can influence the bike hugely. So putting the control tires on really made sure we got even playing field.
The tires were never, ever, ever the problem. It was great.
Whether it's a Maxxis tire or not, the most similar to those tread patterns are what came on pretty much every bike.
Yeah, so the test format was across 5 days, including a bunch of days and a bunch of laps in the bike park and that horrible, hateful test climb that we had set up. Obviously, this is not a long-term test, so long-term durability wasn't tested, and also super nitpicky fine-tuning in terms of bike fit and suspension setup wasn't possible.
An overlying theme that we found through our kind of first impressions was that stack height was a major limitation on some of the bikes. You get only so much steer tube from the factory, and I think that's down to the manufacturer to decide what length head tube they want to use. And something to consider if you're looking at one of these bikes, that you may be looking at an upper crown assembly to get the stack where you might want it. All right, so out of the 6 bikes, Charlie, which bike do you think you would take as is without changing the spec? And if price is no option, just based on performance strictly?
Yeah, if I had to take from the 6 bikes that we tested, yeah, that's a really tough one. I think I'm gonna take the Nukeproof because I really like the sizing, and fit is just like the most important thing for me in terms of bikes. I think I'd have to do more tweaking on the suspension because I never quite got it where I wanted, but just knowing that I would be able to get to a good fit place in terms of climbing and descending, it was the best all around fit.
All right, Lear, of the 6 bikes, if you couldn't change anything, which one do you think you would take?
Ooh, can't change anything? Can I change the handlebars?
Yeah.
Okay, I think I would take the Trek Slash. I think it has kind of the most adjustment available. I think there are certain places that I would really enjoy a mullet bike, and there are other places that I'd really enjoy dual 29ers. And being able to swap the two on that bike, and I also felt that that bike like was just ready to handle anything, which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah, I think that would be the one I would go for. All right, Johnny, out of the 6 bikes we had here this week, which one would you take home?
I think I'd be with Charlie. I'd probably go for the Nukeproof. I thought it fit really well, being a little bit smaller. I think it did a spectacular job of feeling like a trail bike when you wanted it to, and like a long travel enduro bike when you wanted it to. Just really efficient, carried speed really well, and really fun to jump, really easy to corner. I just got along with that bike really well once I got it set up. It was a little difficult at first, but once I got it in a kind of sweet spot, I thought it was just really easy to ride and really enjoyed it. So Charlie, if you had to buy one of these bikes with your own money, you can do whatever you want to it, which bike do you think you would go for?
See, that's such a good question because once you can buy it, you can get a different size. Like if I'm just stealing from the ones we have, there's a bunch like the Deviate or the Canyon which instantly get rolled out because they're just way longer than I want them to be. So I think I would go with the Enduro. I loved it as an all-around bike. The slacker seat angle didn't bother me at all because I don't just want like a 90-degree seat angle for pedaling up a wall. Like I want it a little bit further back for all-around usage. And if I could get that in an S4, I feel like that fit would be right where I want it. Needs a new bar. I'd probably put bigger brake rotors on. I'd probably put exactly the tire combo that came on our bikes. But yeah, I thought it was a phenomenal bike. I'd probably sell the electronic shifting too because that's confusing to me. I don't trust yeah,
Me too.
I don't trust robots.
Yeah,
Yeah.
had a hunch.
Yeah.
Lear, if you had to buy a bike, you can do whatever you want to it. What do you think you would go for?
Ooh, I think if I was buying a bike with my own money, I would buy the Nukeproof because I just think it's like the best bang for your buck, the most general fun bike to ride. Like you guys said, it kind of did everything well. It didn't feel sort of overgunned for some of the slower technical stuff. It was the first bike I rode, and I felt the most comfortable on that bike out of all the bikes, even though it was the first bike. Like, you know, when you're riding new bikes, like you kind of get used to just getting on a strange feeling, and when it's the first one, I almost feel like sometimes that's the hardest bike to get used to, and right away I was so comfortable on the Nukeproof, and it was just super playful, poppy, fun. I don't think it's the race bike, but I'm not a racer, so.
That works. Yeah, if I were to buy one, I would probably go with the Canyon in a size large. I think that's a really good foundation and can handle a lot of stuff. I felt like I kind of do want it to pedal well, and that shape shifter is really useful for that. And then pointed downhill, it's just, yeah, really, it's pretty long, but yeah, if it were a size large, I think it would just be the kind of the best of both worlds. It had a really good feeling at speed. It felt like you could just go faster and faster and change direction relatively easily. That being said, the XL was a little difficult, but I think a large would be a super fun bike to descend on as well.
One more question for you. Which bike surprised you the most?
I think the Enduro surprised me the most. After Lear's initial ride on it and kind of hearing it was more of a sluggish bike, I had a ton of fun on it. I think the rear suspension works incredibly well, and I found it to be actually pretty playful. It wasn't the greatest at tightening up turns when you wanted to, but for riding the bike park, I thought it was, yeah, just an absolute blast.
The Canyon was really surprising. Like I said, I wanted to hate that, but it did a lot of things surprisingly well. But the one that was most surprising was the Deviate Claymore. Like, the suspension was like the holy grail of supple off the top and really absorbed bumps well and carried speed, but felt really stable. Like it was just damped and I wasn't doing a lot of stuff. Now, I'm not gonna spend $10,000 or $11,000 on a bike anytime soon, and I wouldn't want to steal one with a 520 reach, but I was really impressed.
I would have to agree with you on that. I think the Deviate surprised me the most. I expected all the high pivot or the two high pivot bikes that we had to feel really good on the bumps, but having ridden flat pedals for the last 2 years and being a clipped-in rider in the past, it was the bike that I noticed, like, I just felt the most planted on. I could just lock the heels in and just almost feel none of the bumps through my feet, which was pretty impressive. I really, yeah, the Deviate definitely gets an honorable mention, and I would love to try it in a size shorter, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I think that bike was super impressive too, with how I anticipated that high of a pivot to ride, and just being still so playful on stuff, and easy to jump over stuff, easy to hit big jumps on, small jumps. Like, just the wheelbase made the smaller jumps kind of difficult because it would kind of just delete the lip, but yeah, I did not anticipate that bike to be as fun as it was to ride.
Yeah, it was
like the lightest bike. That's surprising in itself.
Yeah.
By about a pound, I think.
It was kind of instant confidence.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, so that's a wrap. 6 bikes tested over 5 days, 60 runs between the 3 of us, and over 72,000 feet of descending. Be sure to stay tuned if you want to see individual videos for each bike, and be sure to check out the site for more info.
Ooh, and I get this. Click this link to like and subscribe.
All right, thanks for watching.
Peace.